CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Juliette Mann.
And I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories. At least 23 dead after a railway overpass collapses in Mexico City. The president promises a swift investigation.
Billionaire philanthropists Bill and Melinda Gates are splitting up, but say their charity work together will go on.
Diamonds are for everyone, says Pandora, as the jewellery firm shifts from mining to cheaper lab-grown gems.
And not so fast. Environmentalists call for speed limits on Germany's free-for-all motorway network. "23 people have been killed and dozens more injured after a railway overpass collapsed in Mexico City while a train was travelling along it.
The accident happened late on Monday evening as people were heading home, with some train carriages falling onto the streets below and crushing passing traffic. A little later in the programme, we will be going live to Mexico City and our correspondent, Frank Contreras.
There are growing calls for a national lockdown in India as the number of COVID cases passes 20 million. Deaths rose by more than 3,400 in the last 24 hours, bringing the total to over 222,000. Many experts believe the true toll could be 5 to 10 times higher than official data.
It's having a detrimental impact on the country's healthcare system, which is struggling to provide enough oxygen, hospital beds and ambulances. Subhash Sharma reports from Mumbai.
Over the past year, this has become a far too common sight in India. As one ambulance leaves a COVID hospital or a crematorium, another one rushes in, overwhelming the drivers as they ferry patients and the dead. Abhinay Lad has been an ambulance driver for most of his life, and he had been delivering bodies of COVID victims to crematoriums for the past year. But even he wasn't prepared for the pain of losing a family member to the virus.
I was carrying bodies for other families, but in here is the body of my older brother's wife. Today I realise the pain that others are going through.
The official death toll has topped over 220,000, but many believe the actual figure is much higher.
I've responded to 6 calls, not a single one from patients. They were all requests to transport bodies.
As fears grow over more infectious viral mutations, many are hesitant to physically touch their infected family members or to perform the last rites for the victims. Often, the drivers have to step in.
We have to do all these things. I've even lifted patients in my arms, those who are old and unable to get in the ambulance.
Even though the drivers realize that they are also at risk, they have to do their job, but they do fear for their families. Many have moved their families to their villages, or they themselves have rented a separate place to live.
I have a daughter at home. She is 1.5 years old. We had rented a house. I did not want them to be at risk, so I vacated that place and sent my family back to our village home.
India's second wave was fueled by the public letting its guard down, with people attending weddings and other social gatherings, political rallies and mass religious events.
Citizens have ignored the risks. We don't listen to the government. People are loitering on the streets. Authorities are asking them to stay at home, but still no one does that. A lockdown is supposed to be in place, but can anybody say this is a lockdown? People are everywhere. What can the government do?
But many frontline medical workers and ambulance drivers stay committed to their jobs, demonstrating a steely resolve in carrying on the fight. Subhash Sharma for CGTN in Mumbai.
Meanwhile, the Indian Premier League 2020 cricket tournament has been suspended indefinitely as a result of the COVID crisis. The unanimous decision to postpone the season follows a rise in cases among players. The 8-team IPL is the richest franchise tournament in the world cricket, with an estimated brand value of $6.8 billion, attracting many of the best players globally. With many countries banning flights from India, cricketers from the UK, Australia and South Africa are now trying to work out how to return home safely.
Joint ventures in vaccine research and production are a central part of a $1.4 billion investment deal agreed between India and the UK. The leaders of the two countries met virtually and have committed to start negotiations on a full trade deal in the autumn. CGTN's Nicole Johnson's in London for us. Nicole, how significant is this trade deal for the UK?
Well, if the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson did manage to secure a trade deal with India, it would be very significant. In this post-Brexit environment, Johnson is really under a lot of pressure to try and secure trade deals. But so far, he's had no luck with the United States. They've been stalling under the new president, and he's had to look further afield to places like Australia, New Zealand and Japan. So getting India on board would be a win, but it could take many months or years. Usually these are long, drawn-out processes. So far, though, it's only an enhanced partnership. That's what they're calling it. But the British government says it will create 6,000 jobs here in the UK. Let's find out exactly what it entails in this report. A new deal for the UK with the world's second most populous country. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi have signed a preliminary trade agreement. Two-way trade between India and the UK is currently valued at $31 billion a year. The UK wants to double this by 2030. India is investing $739 million into the UK, and British businesses have struck $619 million worth of deals in India. Tackling COVID-19 is also part of the agreement. The Serum Institute of India, which is producing the Oxford AstraZeneca shot, will invest more than $330 million into new clinical trials and research in the UK. It's the world's largest vaccine manufacturer.
The AstraZeneca vaccine is being produced in India, and that has been done under voluntary licence. And I'm working very closely with Dr. Ngozi at the World Trade Organization to see what more we can do to ramp up vaccine supply across the world.
And there's also hope from the British side for a tariff reduction. India currently places a 150% levy on Scotch whisky and a 120% tariff on cars. There are also changes ahead for migration. Delhi has agreed to take back Indians living illegally in the UK, and in return the British government will make it easier for Indian students to go to university here.
Nicole, Delhi and the European Union are also planning to open trade talks in coming days. Could that leave the UK behind?
It could do. It does look as though the European Union is set to start these talks. That announcement could be made as soon as this weekend. It will be a number of years since there have been direct talks between the EU and India on trade. The last time it happened was 2013. They had 6 years of talks, and in the end they came up with nothing really substantive, and that's not surprising. These are often very long and drawn-out negotiations. What does all of this mean for the UK? As you said, if we have a European Union-Indian talks underway, and for India that ends up becoming the priority, it could mean that the UK-India trade talks end up parked in the slow lane, and they could take even longer to reach a deal.
Nicole Johnston in London, thank you very much.
And back now to our top story. 23 people have been killed and dozens more injured after a railway overpass collapsed in Mexico City while a train was travelling along it. Live now to Mexico City and Frank Contreras. So, Frank, the pictures look astonishing. Do we know any more about what happened exactly?
Absolutely, Paul. We're here now at the location where this disaster happened last night around 10:30 p.m. Local time here in Mexico City. As you can see, one of the cars is still up there hanging from the rails Mexico City Mayor Claudia Sheinbaum last night reported that one of the concrete beams here on line number 12 of Mexico City's metro collapsed just as the subway was passing over the top of it. And of course, that created this tremendous disaster here, as you reported, killing at least 23 people. There are 79 people injured, some of them very seriously injured. We're told at this very moment people are fighting for their lives in surgical units in a hospital just blocks away from this location we are now. And in the train car behind me here, up on the rail, as you can see it hanging, that orange looking rectangle there, that was one of the trains that was involved in this accident, one of the cars. And inside it, we're told there are still 4 bodies waiting to be rescued. Officials at this hour still need to identify at least 15 of the bodies. In and around the area here, Paul, we're seeing just scores of people, hundreds of people probably, lots of security. National Guard forces are here. Soldiers are here to guard the public safety. There are a lot of family members. We just heard a lady crying out over here to this side of us, of the camera, crying out that the man responsible for this should be placed in jail. Now, she's making reference here to the man who is now the foreign minister of Mexico, Marcelo Ebrard. Back in 2012, he was the mayor of the giant Mexican capital. He was the person who installed, this metro line here, known as the Golden Line, or line number 12. He installed it very quickly and inaugurated just at the end of his administration's term in office. But it happened so quickly that he was facing criticism that maybe it was done too quickly. Over the years, officials discovered that some of the rails did not match the train cars that were purchased for this part of the metro system. And so it was creating high amounts of tension, especially in these high-rise areas above the boulevard here in a location like this. And so there was already intense stress taking place because of the mismatch between rails and the cars that were purchased during the time of Marcelo Ebrard's administration as the mayor of Mexico City. So if there's going to be a politician who will face fire on this, it will be the current foreign minister of Mexico, who is Marcelo Ebrard. At this hour, the mayor of Mexico City, Claudia Sheinbaum, is expected to hold a news conference and give us new updates on what's happening here with the rescue mission, Paul.
Okay, and of course we'll bring that to our viewers as soon as possible. Frank Contreras reporting live from Mexico City. Thank you.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, a growing appetite for home cooking. HelloFresh sees a surge in customers and profit despite an easing of restrictions.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
welcome back to Global Business. Remember, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on smart TV or online, on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Diamonds are for everyone. That's what the world's largest jewellery maker, Pandora, says it aims to achieve, announcing a switch from mined diamonds to lab-grown ones. The Danish company cited concerns about the environment and working practices in the mining industry in making its decision. It says artificial diamonds are not only forever, but also much more affordable. Well, joining us now is Alexander Lasik. He's the CEO of Pandora. Thanks ever so much for coming on the programme. It's a pleasure to have you here. Listen, you've made some announcements in recent years about gold, about silver. Where does this fit into Pandora's broader sustainability drive?
Well, as you probably noticed, we have put our foot down and made an internal choice of going for being a low-carbon business. And we've done a couple of activities in that space. The first one is to ensure that we are going to be carbon neutral by 2025 inside our own operation. Secondly, we have pledged to only use recycled silver and gold also by 2025. So all the decisions we're making internally has an angle to sustainability attached to them, maybe more than in the past.
That's internally, but let's look at the broader diamond market. Talk us through the ethical and sustainable question marks around natural diamonds.
Well, in fact, we actually don't have a strong point of view on mined diamonds because essentially we have not sold mined diamonds in our operation. We have had one product with a fraction of a diamond in there, but it is really a tiny bit of our business. So you can view us as new entrants into the diamond segment in jewelry as such. When we developed this concept, we are trying to stay true to some of the core values of our brand, one of which is affordability. So our audience is one which is concerned with that the value equation is right. So therefore, mined diamonds was not even a consideration because the pricing is simply not right for our customer. Therefore, lab-created diamonds was the alternative here, which was attractive. And our customers, based on the research we've done, suggest that they are very interested in this.
But lab diamonds, as you say, they're going to be lower cost to produce, lower cost to buy. Does that take some of the romance away? I
don't think so. Technological advancements happens in many fields in this world. This is just another one. It's still a lot of allure connected to diamonds. The approach we're taking, and maybe is a bit of a departure from where our company has been to a degree in the past, was to focus maybe a little bit less on the product communication and rather more on the idea and the concept behind the products, much as we have done on Moments, the Moments platform that is our kind of main business. And the same goes in this space. So you have to sell a nice story, an interesting story that people latch onto, and then you execute this in various ways with different types of products underneath. So we believe that the allure is still going to be there because we're focusing very much on the story here.
You're focusing on the story, the idea, the concept, and these diamonds are conflict-free. You've taken the politics out of it that comes sometimes with diamond mining. But sustainable, I mean, how sustainable really are these lab diamonds? Because don't they gobble up a lot of energy to produce, certainly in big markets like the United States and like in China?
Yes, so there are different methods of producing these, and both of the kind of main methods do require a bit of energy for it. But the supplier which we're using in this particular instance, in a year's time, essentially is only going to use 100% renewable energy. So from that standpoint, it's actually very sustainable.
It sounds sustainable. It's going to be more affordable. You've got this concept, this idea to reach out to your younger millennial customers. But what about the impact the pandemic has had on the diamond market in general and on Pandora's business in particular?
So when it comes to what's happened on the diamond market, I'm probably not the right person to speak to because our focus has been on the lab-created side of things. So I think there are other players in the industry that can speak better to that point. I can speak to the impact the COVID has had on our business. And in fact, we think we're kind of faring relatively well. Today, we announced a strong report again. Now, of course, when you have to close all the shops like we had to do for a couple of months in the UK, there is an impact on the consumption. But in fact, our e-commerce business has picked up a large piece of that. So in a way, that channel shift has worked in our way since we started investing quite heavily into both digital marketing as well as the e-commerce side. So I think we have been faring relatively well through this pandemic situation.
The diamonds are for everyone, and they're also online. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Alexander Lasik from Pandora. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates and his wife Melinda have announced that they're divorcing after almost 3 decades of marriage.
One of the world's wealthiest couples, they're worth $130 billion and run one of the largest foundations on the planet. CGTN's John Terrett has more from New York.
These two people are a real power couple in the world of Wall Street, the world of technology, and the world of global philanthropy. Their marriage comes to an end after 27 years, the couple putting out a statement saying that we have tried to work through our differences, but at the end of it all, we feel this is the best way to go. Of course, within the last year, we've seen another very high-profile couple divorce as well. Jeff Bezos, owner of the Washington Post newspaper and Amazon.com, which he set up in the mid-1990s, divorcing from his wife, Mackenzie. It is reported that she maintained a 4% stake in Amazon, worth around $38 to $40 billion, making her the 3rd richest woman in the world. Of course, it's too early to say whatever kind of divorce settlement may come about as a result of Bill and Melinda Gates splitting. But it will be hard for them to live completely separate lives, not least of all because their lives are so entwined through their good work at the foundation. John Terrett, CGTN, outside the New York Stock Exchange.
State-run Saudi oil firm Aramco has benefited from a recent rise in oil prices, posting a 30% increase in first quarter net profits. Income rose to a little under $22 billion in the first 3 months of the year, beating forecasts by a couple of billion. The news also means investors will get their dividend payouts.
US drugs giant Pfizer says it expects to make $26 billion in sales from its COVID vaccine this year as it expands into treatments to cover children and new variants of the virus. The group says sales of the vaccine prototype, which now makes up more than a third of its annual income, topped $3.5 billion in the first quarter, with deliveries to more than 50 countries around the world.
Lufthansa has gone on a buying spree, announcing the purchase of 10 long-haul aircraft, 5 from Airbus and 5 from Boeing, to update the fleet and improve fuel efficiency. The airline confirmed it had welcomed only a quarter of its usual passengers last year and made a loss of $6.6 billion.
The US telecoms giant Verizon is selling the brands AOL and Yahoo in a deal worth $5 billion. Analysts suggest the firm will get back only about half of what it paid for the businesses, having written off just over $4.5 billion from their value in 2018. It's just the latest in a series of deals by the company to offload various media brands, which began with Tumblr in 2018 and which saw the sale of the news website HuffPost last year.
Now, HelloFresh has seen a huge jump in customer numbers and more than doubled its core profit in the first quarter. The Berlin-based company, which delivers pre-packaged fresh ingredients with recipes, reported adjusted earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation and amortization of $191 million, compared to $75 million in the same quarter last year. It says it also had 7.3 million active users globally in the first 3 months of 2021, up 74.2% from a year earlier. And joining us now is Emma Weinberg, Managing Editor of The Grocer. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Emma. So these numbers suggest there's still a huge appetite, if you like, for cooking at home, despite the easing of restrictions in many of the company's big markets.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what they've done really well is attract customers to the recipe box format during lockdown. And what we're finding is these customers are really sticky. So even as restrictions are easing, once they've got a subscription with one of these providers like HelloFresh, they're actually staying with them and they're continuing to order meals through them every week.
Is this level of growth sustainable, though, do you think?
It's a good question, and I'd say possibly not the level of growth. What we've seen, if you look at the wider online grocery market, is a massive level of growth over the past year, which has very much been driven by the pandemic and the conditions that has caused. But the question for these players really is, can they still continue to have growth, but also keep those customers that they picked up during the pandemic? And, that they've built up a massive customer base compared to what they had a year ago at all. So for them, I think it's still a massive rate of growth that they're seeing, and it's still a very good future they've got ahead of them.
And who is it buying these food boxes? Is it young people, small families?
Yes, I think a lot of people have made assumptions about the type of people who buy these boxes in the past. So very much when they first came onto the market, it was seen as an upper middle class type, aspirational almost way of buying food. But actually it really has broadened out to almost all demographics. So, I'd say young professional couples probably are a big part of that demographic, but we're also seeing families, even single people buying these, and it's become a much more, I'd say, a mainstream way of cooking rather than a niche.
We've seen growing demand, Emma, haven't we, and an increasing number of meal kit companies, even restaurants getting in on the action as a source of income during the lockdowns. How crowded is the market now?
I'd say it's quite crowded for another player to come in. We saw a spate where lots of people were joining this, and at the moment now we've got these big players like HelloFresh, we've got Gusto, we've got MyFilChef. I think it would be quite difficult for someone new to come in now and take any sort of sizable share of the market, considering actually when you think about it, it's still a very small share of grocery spend. So there are only so many people really that could come into this space and make a big dent and achieve any sort of realistic amount of sales in that.
And could we see a bigger change in the way people buy and consume food? And does it have the potential to hurt the supermarket revenues?
Again, it's difficult because this is a very small part of the market at the moment. I don't think the supermarkets are losing any sleep over HelloFresh or Gusto at the moment at all. But as we've seen, is they do see this as an area of interest. If you look at all the tie-ups we've seen between the supermarkets and these big recipe box providers, we've seen Sainsbury's tied up for HelloFresh for a while. So they are seeing actually that these do have a tendency to, a potential not to really make a massive dent in their sales, but to take away some customers. And I think that's what we would see really, is just this gradual move towards these recipe boxes, perhaps not, as a main source of shopping for everyone, but sort of gradually in incremental bits of spend going towards those providers as opposed to just the supermarkets.
Emma Weinberg from the Grocer, thank you so much for joining us.
Still ahead on Global Business Europe, why divisions over lockdown restrictions have helped boost turnout in Madrid's regional poll.
More than 100,000 people in Italy have now died from COVID-19.
The vaccination programme offers some hope for the future, but intensive care units are near capacity.
The Spanish government is hoping to vaccinate over 1 million people by next month.
Living in Germany are struggling with their mental health.
Hungary is supplementing the EU's vaccine rollout, buying doses from Russia and China to speed up the process.
4 million people have tested positive in France.
After a grim winter, the promise of a spring bloom that could mean freedom for millions.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, make you loud and clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy idea.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Juliet Mann and Paul Barber. The headlines again. Mexico's president has promised a swift investigation after a railway overpass collapsed onto a busy road in Mexico City. At least 23 people were killed and dozens injured.
The billionaire philanthropists Bill and Melinda Gates are splitting up, but they say although they filed for divorce, their charitable foundation will continue its work.
And Pandora is to stop mining diamonds. The jewellery firm is switching to cheaper lab-grown gems, citing concerns about the environment and working practices in the mining industry.
The pandemic hasn't kept voters away from the polls in Madrid. Despite a rising infection rate, people in the Spanish capital have been lining up to vote. It's a regional election that could send shockwaves through the government of Pedro Sanchez. Let's talk to Rahul Pathak. Rahul, good to see you. What's the turnout been like?
Hello there, Juliet. Turnout has been excellent. Between 5 to 6 million people will have the chance to vote, and they think they will reach those numbers. We've got about 2.5 hours to go before the polling stations close. But as you say, yes, the turnout has been excellent, and that does reflect how important this election is to people, not just in Madrid, but in Spain as well. It's really being seen as a referendum on how the pandemic especially has been handled here, and not just by the local authorities, but by the central authorities, by the national government of Pedro Sanchez, because the way that they've handled the pandemic has been pretty much diametrically opposed to each other, and they've been butting heads for the last year since the pandemic broke out. Now, the Spanish capital has some of the highest infection rates in the country. I think it's second in terms of infection rates in the country. And yet, the pro-business policies of the incumbent, Isabel Ayuso, look set to return her to office with an increased majority. Here's my report.
A regional election with national significance. Madrileños went to the polls on Tuesday. It followed a heated and divisive election campaign that saw candidates receive death threats, people storm out of televised debates. Welcome to the intense world of Madrid politics.
Now, this election is taking place in the shadow of the pandemic, and there were concerns in the lead-up to the vote that turnout would be down because of concerns over Madrid's rapidly increasing COVID infection rate. But as you can see from the queues at this polling station at least, people clearly feel that this election is far too important for them to ignore.
I'm going to vote for the Citizens Party. I think that even if in the past they have made a few bad decisions, I think the centralist position is still important for this country, as the vote seems very polarised. We have to try to keep this party alive.
I think the Popular Party will win. I think they have managed the situation in the best possible way, and other parties were a disaster at managing the pandemic.
I hope the pandemic doesn't affect election engagement. I think everybody is excited about it, so I hope a lot of people get out and vote so we can solve the pandemic situation and all the political issues we have here in Spain.
The snap election was called by the current Madrid leader, Isabel Ayuso of the Conservative Popular Party, who've governed Madrid since 1995. An outspoken critic of the national government and their handling of the COVID health crisis. She's found support outside her normal base, especially amongst the hospitality industry, after she kept bars and restaurants open following the end of the national lockdown last year.
I am feeling so happy because I have been waiting for 54 days for today, and now today is the best day because it's the Democracy Day.
Her critics on the left, like Podemos candidate Pablo Iglesias, say her eagerness to kickstart the economy has come at too high a price, with Madrid's COVID infection rate still way above the national average. However, that message is not resonating with an electorate suffering from severe lockdown fatigue. The big losers in this poll look set to be the centrist Ciudadanos party, who were previously part of Ayuso's ruling coalition. Their roles as potential kingmakers could well be taken over by the ultra-right-wing Vox party. It could be a major concern for Pedro Sanchez's national government, as the balance of power in the capital looks set to swing further to the right.
Rahul, you talk about winners and losers. It's been an unusually acrimonious campaign, hasn't it?
You're not wrong. Every single candidate, of the 6 major candidates, they've all received death threats in the form of bullets in the mail, which is extraordinary in itself. They had one televised debate which pretty much, they almost came to blows. Pablo Iglesias, the socialist candidate, or the hard-left socialist candidate, having a huge row with the ultra-right-wing Vox party candidates, and he eventually stormed out of the studio on live television. They had another debate, or they attempted to have another debate a week later, and Isabel Ayuso said, I'm not attending because it was such a toxic atmosphere before. And I think the really fractious nature of the campaign reflects the polarisation of Spanish politics right now. You know, the moderates are really struggling, and it's the people on the extreme wings of the political spectrum that seem to be getting their message across. People in these times, in these very difficult times, I think they want easy answers, they want very clear messages, they want clear answers, and it seems that Isabel Ayuso's message is the one that's got through. She looks like she's going to return with a majority. I don't think a majority that she will be able to govern on her own. I think she'll have to do a deal with the Vox party, which is kind of the nightmare scenario for the Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez.
Rahul Pathak in Madrid, thanks for that update. Well, a church in Spain has opened its doors to Muslims this Ramadan. With COVID-19 restrictions in place, many worshippers have been unable to meet for the traditional iftar meal this year, which is held daily to break the period of fasting. But the Church of Santa Ana in Barcelona is serving free socially distanced meals in its open-air cloisters to the city's Muslims, and that's including many homeless immigrants. See more, go to europe.cgtn.com.
Now, forearm bumps, face masks and no Zoom meetings in sight as foreign ministers from the world's leading G7 economies met in London today. British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab welcomed his counterparts from the US, France, Germany, Italy, Japan and Canada, as well as EU officials, in the first face-to-face summit in more than 2 years amid tight coronavirus restrictions. For more, let's cross live to CGTN's Naweed Jabarkil in central London. So, Naweed, the British Foreign Office says critical global issues, including relations with Russia and China, are the focus today. What's been said?
Yeah, this was really when the G7 foreign ministers got down to business, if you will, Paul. A series of bilateral meetings held, as well as a group meeting where they discussed the key geopolitical issues facing the group. Top of that list was dealing with the perceived challenges from Russia and China. Ahead of the meetings, Dominic Raab and Antony Blinken, his US counterpart last night, saying that Antony Blinken said that their goal wasn't to contain China or to hold it down. And I think that's a very different language than we saw covering other US Secretary of States from the previous administration who came in. Mike Pompeo, for example, the language a lot less diplomatic. And that's really the basis of this. This sort of diplomatic meeting hasn't happened in almost 2 years. It's the sort of thing diplomats have been used to for centuries and centuries. And what's really the idea was to talk about those main issues. The Iran nuclear deal, for example, we've seen diplomatic efforts there to resume talks in Vienna recently. In terms of the DPRK, Antony Blinken saying that Washington was willing to engage with Pyongyang as well. So we're seeing a real shift back towards the multilateral efforts to try and find diplomatic solutions for some of these problems. But then there were the more difficult conflicts, if you will, to try and resolve the more immediate concerns over what's happening in Myanmar, for example, the G7 highlighted, as well as talking about the intractable wars in the likes of Syria and Afghanistan and ongoing violence, regional violence in Ethiopia. Things have just wrapped up here. Security was tight, a lot of police presence. That's just moved on. Later on this evening, there'll be a dinner where it won't just be the G7 foreign ministers, but they'll also be joined by the 4 guest nations that have been invited, not just to this week, but also to the big G7 World Leaders Summit next month.
Naweed Jabarkil in central London. Many thanks.
Let's get more on this and speak to Jorge Braga de Macedo, who's the former Portuguese Finance Minister and Distinguished Fellow at the Centre for International Governance Innovation. Great to have you on the programme again, George. Look, as we heard there from Noise, we're seeing America's top diplomat here, part of President Joe Biden's return to multilateralism. How significant a step is it?
It's very significant. But one should not overestimate the differences in U.S. foreign policy from president to president. I mean, there are many style-type differences, but there is also a continuity. And this is especially true when there is a rules-based international system, as is the case and has been the case since the end of the Second World War.
Why are countries like Australia, India, South Korea and South Africa, much smaller economies, why are they also taking part in these G7 talks?
Well, that's not a surprise at all. All of them, in fact, are members of the G20. And the G20, a Canadian creation, by the way, CG, which you mentioned was quite important in that, has been to have countries that are systemically relevant, that in a way help first with the finance issues, that's how it was created, and now with every issue. There are summits of the G20, and all these countries have held them, except India, which held a finance meeting in 2002 and will host the G20 in a couple of years. So these are countries that are smaller than other countries, no doubt about it, but they are by no means irrelevant to the international system, and they have a room at the table. There is no surprise at all.
You said there's no surprise that there's room at the table for them, but it's interesting because the UK's Foreign Secretary made a strong statement suggesting a shift towards like-minded countries, perhaps those systematically relevant ones that you're talking about. I mean, what do you think he's getting at then?
Oh, it's very interesting that you should say that, because it proves my point. That sometimes, you know, you say things are the same, but the style is different. I mean, how more different could be the styles of the U.S. presidents? So again, you know, in these things, it's important to appreciate the style, but it's important to look at the substance underneath. And so it's no surprise that everybody says, oh, now it's different. And it's the role of observers such as myself to say, well, yeah, the tie has a different color, but, you know, the policy has not yet changed. And in a way, so much for the better, because with this pandemic, it would be really difficult to understand that rulers of the world will start bickering as if we were in a normal state. We are in a pandemic still.
OK, so you're saying that the cast has changed, but we're still, you know, reading from the same script, if you like. I mean, how is that message likely to be received in Russia and China, who might be wanting for a softening or a change in their relationships with the international community?
I frankly think is that they are fully aware of these differences in, as I said before, in the color of the tie, and that they are part of the international system in a very similar way. Russia was part of the G7 for a time. China was invited to the G7 in 2000. I mean, again, each country, especially systemic countries such as Russia and China, they cannot avoid being part of the rules-based international system. And so the fact that they are in one meeting rather than the other, to me, frankly, is a secondary compared to the fact that they meet together rather often as well.
Well, Jorge Braga de Macedo, always a pleasure hearing your thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, China's Labor Day holiday has seen a boom in domestic tourism. Holiday bookings surged over 40% in this 5-day period compared to 2019 levels. Reservations for visit to scenic spots also more than doubled. CGTN's Weilin Tang reports.
Shanghai remains one of China's top travel destinations over the Labor Day holiday. Throngs of people flock to picturesque sites such as the Bund and the shopping haven at Nanjing Road.
I'm from the central province of Henan. In the past 2 days in Shanghai, we've been to the Oriental Pearl Tower and the Bund. It feels good being in a big city. It's also our first time traveling long distance since the pandemic.
I'm over 80 years old and haven't gone out much to explore the world. This is my first time taking a flight to travel. I feel really happy.
The impact on the hospitality industry is evident. Domestic hotel giant Huazhu Group says it's reporting growth that's almost back to pre-epidemic levels.
As of April 29th, we have seen a 15% growth in the May Day holiday bookings for all of our 6,700 hotels in China compared to that of 2019. In March of this year, our revenues per available room have recovered to 95% of the same period in 2019.
China's recovery from the COVID-19 epidemic has been a shot in the arm for domestic tourism. Hotels are seeing bookings back to pre-COVID levels or exceeding them in some cases. But some may wonder if this is merely pent-up demand and whether this trajectory can actually last.
Global hotel chain IHG believes there are solid fundamentals backing up the recovery. And it's not just because consumption in 2020 has bottomed out and the only way is up.
If you move on to this next 5 years, you will notice that government has said the next 5 years income increase will be in line with GDP growth. That is a huge, huge news because GDP growth we talk about, it will be over 6% on average, which means from next year on, Chinese purchasing power, consumption power will be very much improved. The key thing is after 2021, 2022, we will see consumption fly.
Across China, the broken bridge in the West Lake of Hangzhou and Beijing's Badaling section of the Great Wall are just some of the famous spots which have seen an overflow of tourists. Hospitality players are optimistic that large-scale conferences and exhibitions in the next few months will continue to drive the industry's recovery. Wei Lin Tang, CGTN, Shanghai.
Researchers at China's Tsinghua University say COVID-19 viruses found outside China could be older than those discovered in Wuhan in 2019. Scientists there say they analysed genomes of the virus from around the world and compared them to a version found in bats, which is the closest in nature to the coronavirus. They said examples found in Europe, India and the United States were mathematically closer to the original pathogen than those first found in Wuhan. The WHO is continuing to investigate the origins of the virus, having said it likely passed from animals to humans. France's far-right leader Marine Le Pen has been acquitted of breaking hate speech laws. The case stemmed from 2015 when Le Pen posted 3 graphic images on Twitter showing violence perpetrated by the so-called Islamic State group. It came after a prominent journalist compared her party to the group. Her lawyers welcomed the acquittal, saying it was a victory for freedom of speech.
Egypt has signed a contract to buy 30 fighter jets from France in a deal thought to be worth $4.5 billion. In December, President Emmanuel Macron said he wouldn't make the sale of weapons to Cairo conditional on human rights because he doesn't want to weaken the country's ability to counter terrorism. Egypt's defence ministry says the purchase will be financed through a loan to be repaid over at least 10 years.
The British charity Save the Children says around 5,000 children have been separated from their parents amid fighting in the Tigray region of Ethiopia. The humanitarian group says the children are having to fend for themselves and are vulnerable to physical and sexual abuse. The UN is warning of alarming levels of malnutrition in the region.
US President Joe Biden has raised the annual cap on refugee admissions to more than 4 times the level set by his predecessor, Donald Trump. The president increased the cap to 62,500 after facing criticism from his party for initially ruling out an increase. Biden also ended Trump's restrictions on resettlements from Somalia, Syria and Yemen. He went a step further by adding more slots for refugees from Africa, the Middle East and Central America.
Stay with us here on CGTN. Still to come, France votes on new climate laws that could see a ban on short-haul domestic flights as the government warns of big policy changes ahead.
Each day, there are millions of stories.
Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Murray, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. France's National Assembly has just approved new climate laws that could see a ban on short-haul domestic flights after more than 200 hours of debate.
The bill aims to put France on course to meet its goals of cutting greenhouse gases by 40% within a decade. But environmental groups say the proposals don't go far enough. Let's go live now to Paris and join Ross Collins. So, Ross, what exactly is being proposed as part of this bill?
Yeah, this bill clearing the lower house just in the last half hour or so, a healthy margin for the government. It now goes to the Senate next month for that proposed legislation to go before senators, and if it clears the Senate, then it will go to Emmanuel Macron to be written into law. I mean, it is a huge bill, Paul. If we're just looking at a list of some of the major proposals, it's greening the economy, adapting work to the ecological transition, protecting ecosystems, protecting biodiversity, favouring renewable energy, promoting alternatives to cars, limiting truck emissions, limiting airline emissions, reducing energy consumption. I could go on and on. It is a large number of policies that are enshrined in this bill. It also it reinforces the judicial protection of the environment. New crimes such as ecocide are in this bill as well. 10 years in prison for people causing serious damage to the environment, 3 years in prison for people just causing damage to the environment. On a broader scale, this is something like the destruction we're seeing in the Amazon dialed down to a national level in France. The Environment Minister says that could be something such as polluting a river. There are other headline policies as well. You mentioned one in the lead-in there, the scrapping of expansion plans for airports. Also, short-haul flights banned, where there is an equivalent railway route already in operation. Now, the time limit for this railway route was a real point of contention in Parliament. The version that's got through is 2.5 hours. So the example is, if you want to fly from Paris to Bordeaux, you cannot, because there is already a train running from Paris to Bordeaux that is 2.5 hours in duration. Activists wanted more. They wanted a 4-hour limit, so there wouldn't be any more flights from Paris to Marseille, for example, because the Paris to Marseille train takes 4 hours. The government didn't go for that in the end, going for this 2.5-hour limit. So we will see the scrapping of some short-haul flights for people to be taking the train instead. Also, we're going to see the effects across most aspects of society. Paul, for example, your children, if they're going to school in France, there's going to be a change to the menu. At least one day a week will be a vegetarian menu, and part of the government's drive to try to consume less meat. Also, we're going to see the effects on the road as well. There's going to be an effect on heavy goods vehicles. By 2040, they're no longer going to be able to be powered by diesel and petrol. Also, there's going to be a ban from 2030 onwards. You'll no longer be able to buy one of the most polluting types of cars.
OK, thanks very much, Ross. Ross Cullen there in Paris.
Now, Germany doesn't have a speed limit on most of its national motorway network, the Autobahn. Drivers going from Cologne to Frankfurt or Berlin can go as fast as they like.
But worries about pollution and danger on the roads are creating concerns. In recent years, more and more people have publicly supported a speed limit, but the topic remains taboo, as Ryan Thompson reports.
It's called the Autobahn. 12,996 kilometers of open road. It's inspired musicians, writers, and directors, but it's world famous for something else: speed. We drove more than 300 kilometers from Frankfurt to Bavaria to experience it for ourselves.
Once you're actually driving on the German Autobahn, you really get the impression of just how impressive this is as an infrastructure project. You're free to go as fast or as relatively slow as you want. It's one of the densest route networks, not just in Europe, but really the entire world. You can go from point A to point B. Nearly every German city is connected on it.
Arriving in Bavaria after a few hours on the road, we met with historian Christopher Neuermeyer.
They talk about the Autobahn because we don't have any speed limit. That's the unique selling proposition of the German Autobahn.
What does the Autobahn mean to Germans?
The Autobahn is an emotionally charged topic in Germany, like the right to keep and bear arms in the United States. It's mostly not argued rationally, but on an emotional basis.
And maybe that's why Germany has only a recommended speed of 130 kilometers, or about 80 miles per hour, while the rest of the world sets legal limits on their own roads that are far slower. In recent years, more people have supported a speed limit because of growing safety and environmental concerns. In fact, almost half the network has some kind of speed restriction today, but many would like to see more.
Ein großes Risiko von sehr schweren Verkehrsunfällen.
There is a high risk of very serious traffic accidents. That would actually be significantly lower with a general speed limit of 120 kilometers per hour. Then there's climate protection. If a vehicle drives very, very quickly, the car also uses significantly more fuel than a vehicle that travels at a maximum of 120 kilometers per hour.
Police have also become more active at stopping speeding, setting up speed traps that can be hard to spot and issuing fines. The Autobahn of tomorrow is likely to look a lot different, with or without speed limits. New asphalt could make roads quieter, and digital monitoring of traffic would keep cars flowing. Many want the movement to be limitless when it comes to speed, but safety and environmental concerns are increasing considerations. Ryan Thompson, CGTN, the Autobahn.
Reminder of our top stories on Global Business Europe. Mexico's president has promised a swift investigation after a railway overpass collapsed onto a busy road in Mexico City. At least 23 people were killed and dozens injured.
The billionaire philanthropists Bill and Melinda Gates are splitting up, but they say although they filed for divorce, their charitable foundation will continue its work.
And Pandora is to stop mining diamonds. The jewellery firm is switching to cheaper lab-grown gems, citing concerns about the environment and working practices in the mining industry.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
There's more on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We are available to watch on smart TV apps like Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN Africa Live, but we'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Bye.